Before I start this story, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you still keeps me awake at night, and you won't want to miss the other stories that connect to it in ways I didn't understand until much later, and if you like hearing real people's experiences with the strange, you're in the right place. I used to work nights as a contract security guard for a property management company that handled a lot of older buildings, government offices, abandoned clinics, warehouses that had been turned into cheap office space. The job was mostly boredom with the occasional drunk trespasser or false alarm. But there was one building that felt wrong from the first night, and I'm convinced that place was watching me just as carefully as I was supposed to be watching it. The building sat alone at the edge of an industrial district, a 12-story block of concrete and dark, reflective windows that never showed you what was really going on inside. It used to be some kind of research facility in the 70s, then a government records center, and now it was mixed offices, according to the sign out front. During the day, it was busy enough: law firms, a staffing agency, a couple of tech startups. But at night, it became something else entirely. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I'd check in at the small lobby desk, pick up the radio, and do rounds every hour, walking the stairwells and empty corridors, then return to the security room on the third floor where the camera feeds were displayed on an old wall of 14 monitors. The first thing I noticed my very first night was the dead zone on the screens. Every floor had at least 2 cameras in the hallway, one by the elevator and one facing the fire stairs. Every floor except the 11th. On the grid of cameras where 11 North and 11 South should have been, there was just black. No static, no camera offline message, just pure, deliberate blackness, like someone had painted over reality. I asked the day guard about it when he handed over the keys. He glanced at the monitors, shrugged, and said, "Cameras up there never worked. Whole floor's empty anyway. You won't have to go up there." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Stair doors are locked from the 10th. Elevator won't stop there unless you have an override card, which you don't. So if anything shows up from 11 on those screens, call the supervisor. Don't go looking for it." He laughed when he said it, but it didn't feel like a joke. My first few weeks were uneventful. The building made the usual after-hours noises: pipes knocking, vents sighing, distant thumps from who knows where. The lights in the hallways were kept dim at night, just enough to see by, and the humming of the fluorescent bulbs became a kind of background drone I almost got used to. I learned the pattern of the elevator, how it liked to return to the lobby by itself after a few minutes of inactivity, how it sometimes juddered between the 6th and 7th floors, like it was thinking about getting stuck there. I memorized the timing of the automatic lights in the stairwells, the exact second when the motion sensors would decide I no longer existed and plunge everything back into shadow. About 3 weeks in, small things started to feel off. It began with the motion sensor alerts on the monitor panel. Each camera had a little green icon that lit up when it detected movement, just to draw your eye. On slow nights, I'd watch them like little blinking stars. One night at 2:41 a.m., I saw the icon for 10 North flick on. The screen showed the usual empty corridor, carpeted floor, doors to offices on either side, exit sign glowing at the far end. No movement, no one walking, just the sensor insisting that something was moving there. Then 10 South lit up too, and that hallway was just as still. I checked the stairwell cameras. No one had come up or down for over an hour. I chalked it up to a bug in the system until it began happening regularly, always between 2:30 and 3, always on the 10th floor. Sometimes the icons would flicker in a sequence, one camera after another, as though something was walking slowly around the square perimeter of the floor just outside the reach of the lens, brushing past each motion sensor without ever letting itself be seen. After a few nights of this, I started taking notes. On a scrap of printer paper, I wrote down the times and which cameras lit up. When I compared them, I realized something. The pattern was repeating in almost the exact same way each night, with only a few seconds difference. It was like watching a looped recording rather than live footage. I told myself it could be some automated system, a cleaning robot maybe, or airflow triggering the sensors. But there were no janitors scheduled during my shift, and the building's air system shut down at midnight to save costs. I could actually feel the air get heavier around that time, like the building was holding its breath. The first genuinely unnerving thing happened about a month into the assignment. It was a Wednesday, around 3:15 a.m. I remember the exact time because the clock on the wall had just ticked over. I was sitting in the security room drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm when the elevator dinged. That in itself wasn't too strange. Sometimes the old thing would move on its own, but the monitors showed it leaving the lobby and traveling up instead of down. The little digital floor indicator climbed. 2, 3, 4, then stopped on 10. That was weird, but what really bothered me was what happened next. Every single motion icon on the 10th floor lit up at exactly the same moment. 10 north, 10 south, both stairwell entrances. All of them, glowing green in a circle around the unseen elevator doors. Nothing moved on the screens. No one stepped out. For maybe 10 seconds it stayed that way, the building insisting something was up there, even while my eyes told me the floor was empty. Then very slowly, the motion icons began turning off one by one, as though whatever had arrived was walking away down the hall, past each sensor, leaving the elevator behind. I felt an overwhelming urge to go check it out, not because I wanted to be brave, but because the idea of something moving around up there without me verifying it was worse than the idea of actually seeing someone. I grabbed my flashlight and took the stairs instead of the elevator. I always took the stairs after midnight. Being enclosed in that metal box felt too vulnerable. As I climbed, the building got quieter. From the 3rd to the 8th floor, I could still faintly hear the hum of some server rooms, a soda machine buzzing somewhere, the whisper of the city outside. But from the 9th floor up, the silence was different. It wasn't just a lack of noise. It was the presence of something that had no sound of its own. The motion-sensing lights flicked on ahead of me, then off behind me, trying to keep up as I climbed. The door to the 10th floor opened with the same mechanical click as all the others. The hallway beyond was dim but perfectly ordinary. Blue-gray carpet, framed emergency maps on the wall, closed office doors with little numbered plaques. I stepped out, feeling suddenly like I'd walked into a photograph of the building instead of the real thing. The air was colder here, just enough that I could see the faintest hint of my breath when I exhaled. That shouldn't have been possible with the heating system, even in night mode. I walked the perimeter of the floor, checking each office door to make sure it was locked. They were. I checked the windows. Some of them gave me a view of the empty parking lot and the distant, hazy glow of the city. Everything was still, almost too still. When I rounded the last corner and approached the elevator lobby, something made me stop. The elevator doors were closed, but the little digital indicator above them, the one that showed what floor the car was on, was blank. No number, just a dark rectangle. I have never seen that in any elevator before or since. I hit the call button out of reflex. Nothing happened. No sound, no lights. But I felt a slight vibration through the floor, as though there was an enormous, heavy thing somewhere below trying to decide if it wanted to move. For a moment, I had the distinct, irrational thought that the elevator wasn't on any floor, that it was sitting in a space that wasn't counted by the numbers on the panel, waiting for someone to step inside so it could take them there. I backed away, returned to the stairwell, and went straight back down to the security room. When I looked at the monitors, the elevator indicator showed it was resting neatly on the lobby level, as if it had never gone anywhere at all. I told myself that if I wanted to keep this job, I needed to stop letting my imagination run wild. The next few nights were quieter. The motion icons still did their little dance on the 10th floor, and the cameras on 11 remained dead black, but nothing out of the ordinary happened beyond that. I actually started to feel a kind of uneasy companionship with the building, like we were stuck there together until dawn and had to at least tolerate each other. And while you're listening to this in the middle of the night or whenever you've got your headphones in, take a second right now not to forget to subscribe, like this video, share it with someone who loves creepy stories, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next time I talk about what this place did, because the part I'm about to tell you is when things stopped being just strange and started feeling personal. It was a Friday when the 11th floor cameras came to life for the first time. I was halfway through my shift, around 1 a.m., flipping absent-mindedly between feeds just to keep my brain from going numb. I glanced at the top row of screens, and the black rectangles that had always marked 11 North and 11 South were no longer black. They were dim, grainy views of a hallway I had never seen before. The strange thing was, I knew it had to be the same building by the layout. Same carpet, same overhead lights, same exit sign style. But the color was wrong. Everything was tinted slightly green, like the footage had been run through night vision software, and the image had this slow, breathing pulse to it, a barely perceptible lightening and darkening, like the camera was inhaling and exhaling. I checked the camera list to see if someone had added new devices, but the system log showed nothing. According to the computer, those feeds were still offline. I tapped the monitor casing, wondering if it was some kind of image burn-in, but the hallway changed as I watched. One of the doors, at the far end of the corridor on 11 North, slowly swung inward, all by itself. There was nothing beyond it but darkness. I waited for the motion icon to blink on, but it didn't. The system still thought there was no movement on that floor whatsoever. I leaned closer, squinting at the tiny label next to the door frame on the screen. The resolution was awful, but I could just make out a small metal plaque with a number on it. 42. That didn't make sense. Every door on every floor had 3-digit numbers, corresponding to the floor. A door on the 11th floor should have been labeled 1101, 1102, something like that. But this one just had 2 digits, 4 and 2. Like it was part of a completely different numbering system that had nothing to do with the rest of the building at all. When I blinked, the door on the screen was closed again. I hadn't seen it move, but it was definitely shut. I glanced at the clock. 1:17 a.m. For reasons I still can't explain, my skin crawled at the sight of that number. The rest of the night, the 11th floor feed slid back and forth between blackness and that eerie green hallway, never long enough in one state for me to be sure what I'd really seen. I thought about telling my supervisor, but I already knew how that would sound. The cameras are working, but only when they want to, and there's a wrong door with a wrong number on a floor I can't get to. I decided to keep my mouth shut. A week later, the building stopped pretending it wasn't paying attention to me. It started with the radio. Around 3:05 a.m., the time I'd taken to calling the thin hour because it felt like the whole world had gone transparent, I heard a soft burst of static from the handheld radio sitting on the desk. I picked it up, thinking it might be the overnight supervisor checking in, but there was no voice, just a faint rustling sound, like someone adjusting the microphone on the other end. "Control, this is Site 3, I said. "Do you copy?" A crackle, then nothing. I repeated myself. Silence. I was about to clip the radio back onto my belt when I heard it, my own voice, whispering back to me. Not in real time, but like a recording being played a fraction of a second after I spoke. "Do you copy?" It echoed softly, distorted, the last word stretching out like tape being pulled too slowly through a reel. The sound didn't come from the radio speaker. It came from somewhere just over my shoulder. I spun around, but the room was empty. Only the hum of the monitors answered me. I told myself it was feedback, maybe some weird delay in the system, and forced myself to put the radio down. The moment I did, one of the cameras flicked its motion icon on. It was 3 North, the hallway right outside the security room. The screen showed the closed door I was sitting behind, still and ordinary, but the sensor insisted something was moving out there. I watched, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The icon pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat. I decided I needed to prove to myself that nothing was there. I opened the security room door and stepped into the hallway. It was empty, of course. The only sound was the faint buzz of the vending machine at the far end. I turned back to the room and saw something that made my stomach drop. On the monitor, labeled 3 North, I saw my own back retreating into the security room. The door closed behind the figure on the screen. But in reality, I was standing in the hallway, door still open. I could see the monitors from where I was. I watched as the version of me on the screen sat down at the desk, rested his elbows on the table, and buried his face in his hands like he was exhausted. The real me, standing in the doorway, didn't move. I slowly stepped back inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the image on the screen jumped, flickered, and then synced up. Now it showed exactly what it should have. Me standing awkwardly by the door, staring at the camera. All the motion icons went dark at once. I didn't check the hallway cameras again for almost an hour. The building, however, did not appreciate being ignored. At 4:12 a.m., every monitor on the wall briefly blinked off. Every single one, including the ones that normally stayed on even during a reboot. And when they came back, all of them were showing the same thing. The 11th floor hallway. 14 identical feeds, all of that green-tinted corridor stretching away into darkness. At the far end, the door with the plaque reading 42 stood slightly ajar. As I stared, the cameras began to desynchronize, each one showing the hallway at a slightly different point in time. On one screen, the door was wide open. On another, it was closed. On a third, it was swinging shut. The views slipped and overlapped until it felt like I was looking at 14 different versions of the same place, each a few seconds apart from the others. In some of them, if I squinted, I thought I could see a shape standing halfway down the hallway, too tall somehow, and too still. In others, the hallway was empty. I was frozen, one hand halfway to the radio, when the hallway lights on the screens began to go out. One by one, each monitor's fluorescent ceiling fixtures blinked off, starting from the camera's point of view and racing away toward the distant door like someone was running down the hall hitting every switch. In the real security room, the overhead fluorescent tube gave a struggling flicker, once, twice, then the power went out. Emergency lights kicked in immediately, a dull red glow that turned the room into a dark room. The monitors stayed on, running on some separate backup, but now they were the only real source of light. On their screens, the 11th floor corridor was pitch black. For several seconds, there was only the soft whir of electronics and the faint hiss of my own breathing. Then, slowly, a rectangle of lighter gray appeared halfway along the hallway on one of the monitors, as though one of the office doors was opening onto some place where light still existed. Another door opened on another screen, and another. Each rectangle of light was a different color temperature. One bluish like a winter morning, one golden like sunset, one the cold white of a hospital corridor. I realized, with a cold, sinking feeling, that I was looking not at one building, but at ends of many different hallways, connected to the same impossible floor. I don't know how long I sat there watching those lights breathe. Eventually, the main power clicked back on, the room brightened, and the monitors snapped back to their normal feeds. The 11th floor cameras were black again. I should have walked out right then. I should have left the keys on the desk, taken the stairs down, and never gone back. But when I stood up, intending to do exactly that, my legs carried me to the stairwell door instead of the exit. It was like my body had decided without me that we were going up. The stairwell was its usual echoing concrete shaft, but the air felt heavier, thicker, like I was climbing through something denser than oxygen. The motion lights struggled to keep up, flicking on barely in time to stop me from climbing in darkness. ninth floor, 10th. When I reached the landing between 10 and 11, where there should have been just a blank wall and the underside of another flight of stairs, I found a door that hadn't been there before. It was metal, painted the same institutional beige as the others, but unmarked. No floor number, no fire instructions. Just a small square window that reflected my face back at me in the dim stairwell light. My key ring had at least 30 different keys on it, each tagged with a tiny plastic label. I tried the master key, not expecting anything. It turned smoothly in the lock. The door opened on a hallway bathed in pale, flickering green light. The 11th floor. It looked exactly like the camera feeds. Same carpet, same exit signs. The only difference was that everything was utterly silent. Even the hum of electricity was gone. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me with a sound that seemed too loud for the space. Ahead, the corridor stretched farther than it should have, the perspective subtly warped. As I walked, the ceiling lights ahead of me blinked to life and died behind me, as if the building only wanted to show me a small slice of itself at a time. I passed doors with normal office numbers, 1103, 1105, 1107. But every few steps there would be an inconsistency. A door with no handle, a light switch that had been installed upside down, a vent that breathed warm air while everything else was cold. I don't know how long I walked before I saw it, but when I did, it felt like I had been moving toward it my entire life. The door with the plaque reading 42. The numbers were slightly crooked, hammered into the metal at some point with more force than care. There was no keyhole, no handle, just a smooth surface and that stubborn little badge of identity. I reached out to touch the plaque. It was warm, as if someone's hand had been resting there just before mine. For a second, the hallway lights dimmed, and in that half-darkness, I felt the strongest impression that I was standing on the edge of a loop, some kind of circuit that had been run thousands of times, and that if I opened this door, I would simply be plugging myself into it as the next component. I knocked instead. Just once, a single tentative rap of my knuckles against metal. The sound didn't echo the way it should have. It was swallowed, like the building ate it. Somewhere inside the walls, something whirred to life. The plaque grew hotter under my fingertips, almost too hot to touch. I pulled my hand away. The hallway lights flashed 3 times in rapid succession. When they steadied, I noticed something on the wall directly opposite the door that I could swear hadn't been there before. It was a fire evacuation map under a plastic cover, showing a simple floor plan with arrows pointing to the stairwells. A tiny red dot marked, "You are here." According to the map, there was no room 42. The space where the door I was facing should have been was just a blank section of wall. And the hallway behind me, the one I'd walked down, was much shorter in the diagram than what I'd actually experienced. The little red dot flickered, just once, like it was alive. I started walking back the way I'd come, not looking over my shoulder, not running, but moving as quickly as I could without breaking into a sprint. The building didn't like that. The overhead lights began to switch off ahead of me instead of behind, trying to plunge the path into darkness before I could reach the next patch of safety. I pushed myself faster. Just when the last light went out, I reached the stairwell door and yanked it open. I stumbled through, slamming it shut with a jolt that rattled the handrail. The stairwell was blessedly normal, gray, echoing, humming faintly with the sound of the building's systems. I went straight down to the lobby, walked out into the cold pre-dawn air, and called my supervisor from the parking lot to tell him I was sick and had to go home. I never went back to that site. A week later, the company reassigned me to a different building across town. They said the client at the old tower had decided to make some changes and didn't need as many guards. I didn't argue. But the building, or whatever was inside it, wasn't quite done with me. The first time I realized that was about a month after I left. I was at home, scrolling through my phone late at night with the TV murmuring in the background. I opened a photo app to look at some pictures I'd taken earlier that day. Between two completely ordinary shots, a picture of my coffee and a blurry picture of my friend's dog, there was an image I hadn't taken. It was low resolution and grainy, tinted an ugly green. It showed a hallway stretching away into darkness, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. Halfway down the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar, and on the metal surface, two crooked numbers gleamed, 42. I stared at it until my phone screen dimmed with inactivity. When I tried to zoom in, the app crashed. When I reopened it, the photo was gone. Sometimes late at night, my phone will light up with a notification that never quite resolves, a call that ends before it rings, a voicemail that plays nothing but faint, layered echoes of my own voice asking, "Do you copy?" in tones I don't remember using. And every now and then, if I'm awake at 3:17 a.m., I'll catch my reflection in a dark window or a blank TV screen and see, just for a fraction of a second, not the room I'm actually in, but the outline of that 11th floor hallway stretching away behind me, waiting patiently for me to step through the wrong door at the wrong time and complete the loop. It's been trying to close around me ever since.